Welcome to the Round 6 Supercoach Coach podcast. My name's Marcus, and this week we're joined by two returning guests. And I'll intro the first guy who hasn't been on the main show all season yet, and so I'm sure listeners are very excited to hear him back on board. Bryce, welcome back to the show, mate.
Thanks for having us back. I think this is the first time I've been on video on the main show, so this is what I look like. So I can turn the video off now. Just adjust the lighting. Hang on a sec. That's a bit better. Yeah.
Love it, Bryce. And we've got Faz back joining us again. Welcome back, mate.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Great to be back here. And Bryce, we haven't had you on the show yet, but we've certainly all been following you along closely on Twitter. If anyone's not following Bryce on Twitter, it's the best follow out there, so get around him.
All right, as we do each week, around the grounds to hear how we went. I don't know if I want to go first or last, which one's better for covering my shame, but I'll throw to Faz first. Why don't you kick us off, mate? How was your weekend of Supercoach?
Yeah, conspicuously, I've been off the show the last few weeks because it hasn't been a great run, but now that I had a good score, happy to come on. So it was 22.55 for me this week. So the rank has moved up to just outside the top 20,000, if that is an indication of how the previous weeks have been going. Trade-wise, I really dodged a bullet this week. I had the Butters injury to deal with, and initial plans were to go to Ridley. Obviously, that would have been disastrous with him going out early with a concussion. But then the ruck carnage hit, so I ended up taking the cash I had from Butters to get myself from Lloyd Meek up to Maxi Gawn. Pretty happy with that one, I'd say. 170 for his first game into the side.
Nice work.
And we were just talking before, I think both Bryce and I are now back to the Gawn-Grundy combo. Marcus, the reaction says it all.
You've left me alone, guys. I thought we were going to ride this sinking ship, Faz. Means you can show up with a smile on your face. I thought I was going to maybe pip you as the week was running along. Then Gawn just blew it out of the water, and I had Tracy's Sweet 16. Just awful. Anyway, Bryce, we haven't had you on the show as mentioned in a while, so why don't you just give us a bigger recap on how you're going so far?
Yeah, so I guess as mentioned earlier, I've been on the R2 Flynn Hunter setup, and we're all pretty happy first couple of weeks, and then madness. Last week I got off that structure when Hunter and Flynn were missing, so I packaged up all my problems and came up with a solution and went Hunter and Neil and brought in Grundy and a rookie to kind of restructure. Got back to Grundy Gawn, so I was on that for this week. So that's been quite handy. I've been going through quite a few trades, and they're all trades I'd do again, but just been a little bit unlucky with injuries, as I know a lot of the community has been as well. So I feel like I've been shuffling my team around a little bit, but have been stuck in the top 10K for most of the time. So have been reasonably happy. So despite having the Grundy set up, I just scored terribly this week. I had Berry and Campbell on field, Ridley's 31, and that was enough to bring me down to a score of 21.27. So I dropped from about 4K out to 6.5K. How'd you go, Marcus?
Yeah, well, you said you managed a poor score. It's funny, like my team was looking brilliant for the week, I thought. It's still ended up with a 21.60. The bar's a lot lower when you don't have Max Gawn. I feel like I'm going all right. I guess I'm not going all right. 21.60 I will take, considering I had Tracy on ground. I had to do trade in the rucks to avoid a donut, but I couldn't really hit anyone that I wanted. I was considering Hickey or McInerney, who both got injured, and went with Tracy instead. So I guess I'm upset about the 16, but I guess I'm happy that I didn't pick up a player who then got injured. Traded to Lockie Jones as well from Jordan Clark. So a little bit worried about my trade situation. That's 5 trades now for not really an upgrade yet, but 275k in bank, so I'll be able to hit somebody with an upgrade this week. And Jones at least scored 69. And I was a bit worried with when Clark was playing. If he came on as an emergency or medical sub, which I think he was listed, things would have worked out pretty poorly with his price. So I'm pretty happy I made the move there. Patrick Dangerfield was especially disappointing. Like, I've held him and he came back for 75.
Yeah.
75. So bad. Taranto 85, Cripps 83, and Tom Mitchell second Week in my team, another price drop, 76 off 32 possessions. Frustrating. 1 week is a short time in AFL and a short time in Supercoach, so I'm hoping for onwards and upwards. Flynn comes back this week, scores 100, and I'll be laughing. But if he doesn't, I'll be bloody crying. So we'll see. Before we get on to this week's topics, we'll mostly be talking about doing an early upgrade. So 3 price movements means we can finally have a look at our first upgrades. But before we get into that, a quick update on our Patreon group. If you've joined us as a new listener, we have a Patreon so that you can support the show and get bonus content. And we also give out a cash prize to the leader of our Patreon group at the end of the season. And we have a new leader after the weekend, and that person is Heath with his team Herbivores. 23-14 saw Heath move up into the top 250, so sitting at 226th overall. Very exciting for Heath. Well done to you, and we'll keep our eye out for that competition. Our leader for the last few weeks, Zach, is only 1 point behind at 228, so very tight up there at the top of our ladder. All right, this week, all about early upgrades. And we'll start with a question from our patron, Oralis Maximus. Is it too early to start our upgrade cadence? I have 25 trades available, and with 2 trades, he could bring in Lockie Jones and then have enough cash to upgrade a rookie to a premium elsewhere, Warner to Dunkley or somebody to Neil. So Morales is in a pretty good situation there. I think generally, though, to be able to hit a true premium, you need to have a little bit of cash in bank. I know in the Patreon show, we are talking about the benefits of keeping 100, 150K up your sleeve ahead of this round. But I suppose with a lot of side swaps that have been happening recently, a lot of people have actually just found themselves with a little bit of cash in bank, and that probably makes this week's decision a lot easier. I think the real answer to this week's question is who can you hit as a premium with that price? You know, if you're trading out 250K players and you're downgrading to Lockie Jones across 140, you might only be able to hit a 350K premium. We don't really want to be taking an upgrade risk on not a true premium, but if you have a bit of cash in bank, this week certainly opens up your options a little bit. Bryce, how do you see this week as being a first upgrade week? Are you potentially on track to do that, or are you potentially holding on for another?
I'm keen to get into that upgrade cadence. I've got a little bit of money in bank to help with that, to try and hit one of the true premiums that I think are going to be keeping for the season. But it's a little bit tricky because it depends on the guys you trade out and their value, and they're probably the guys that are going to be scoring well on field. So I'm just trying to work out which 2 players that I can package up and who I can get to. So for me, I plan to bring in Jones, and I plan to bring in a premium, but it means I'll have to trade out 2 on-fielders, which will be players like Campbell, which might not actually allow me to get to one of the top guys, or players like Goulden and Warner, guys that you probably want to keep until the buys because they're scoring well. I don't mind trading out some of these guys that I'd usually have on the field if I can bring in guys that I think their scoring on field is still decent. Jones could be one of those, but yeah, whatever it is, I think that I'll be upgrading this week. If I decide that I want to keep those guys, keep their scoring on field, then I'm probably going to bring in a guy which is a bit more speculative, a bit cheaper in price, trading out maybe a bench rookie. So those guys are only worth 200K, so it's really difficult to actually get up to a premium. So maybe targeting someone like a Brayshaw who's under 500K is one that I think that could be a top 10 mid or top 15 and might be worth the risk at this point in the season to get into that upgrade cadence. So they're the kind of things that I'm weighing up at the moment.
We have a question from Nick Taylor about trade out candidates. So he said he's got Cozzy at 159, Berry at 213, Scott at 181, Campbell at 244. Faz, what do you reckon about the trade out targets? Right? I know from your time on the show, one of the bits that you've been pretty good at reminding the listeners about is when you're doing your upgrades, actually paying attention to who you're trading out on the field, which is precisely the point that Bryce is making. It's a little bit of a balancing act. How much risk do you take in terms of the player that you trade in? How much risk do you take in terms of replacing a good on-field scorer rookie with a bit more of an unknown quantity? Who are you considering in terms of your first trade out targets?
Yes, I think this week's a little different than most years with Lockie Jones being available. It tends to be that the best rookies, you know, they get named round 1, and so you've usually drained the well pretty empty with the good rookies right at the start of the year. Lockie Jones is presenting at a really nice time of year as that first downgrade who, as Bryce mentioned, you do feel pretty confident playing him on field. He's had a couple of decent scores, I think around the 60 mark for his first 2 games, has that bigger body. I don't think he's going to set the world on fire with his scoring, but I think should still be 60-ish type player, which, as we've seen this year, we've seen far worse from some of our rookies. So I'd be very confident bringing Lockie Jones on field to replace one of the rookies. But I think my focus, I think as Bryce was mentioning, is more about who's coming out of the side more so than who's coming in at this point of the year. And I'm tempted, particularly with the 3 Sydney rookies that most of us have, with Goulden, Campbell and Warner. They've got Gold Coast this week, so I'm hesitant to get rid of any of them just with a potentially good game coming up this week. And if they could spike 80 plus score this week, their price starts to get to a really nice number, particularly for Warner and Goulden, who are above 300 already. If they can get 80 plus this week, then you could see their scores getting over 350. So what I'm going to be targeting this week is trying to look at my bench rookies. I've got Jordan Clark. At least this week we'll know before the first game gets played whether he's back in the side, because Geelong plays Saturday afternoon. So we'll get those teams on Friday night. If Jordan Clark's still out of the side, then he's probably one that I'd look to be moving on because he started more expensive. Our patron that asked the question is talking about Kajitsky type players, but if they're at 159,000, if you're doing a downgrade to Lockie Jones, you're not really making any money at all there. And unfortunately, we've got quite a few rookies at that price still. I think my strategy with those type of guys is just going to be just try and hold them for now. Just back them in that they will get a decent score at some point. I'd be looking at maybe a Paddy Dow type because he's not getting games anymore. He's one that I'd consider, but I think I'm going to try and hold on to those Sydney guys. And in my situation, that's probably going to mean I'm going to have to wait a week to start the upgrades. I got Gorn last week, so I really drained the bank in terms of all of my cash. I've only got 6,000 in the kitty right now. I think I can manufacture a trade to get Brayshaw in, so that'd be the way that I'd be able to do that, but I'm probably just unwilling to take a risky pick at this part of the year.
And wondering, outside of the rookies, looking at some of the other mid prices, Fantasia, for example, at 280k versus Chad Warner at 330 or Errol Goulden at 315. Would you sooner trade out your rookies over a guy like Fantasia? Where do your mid prices sit outside of the guys that have been dropped in relation to your rookies? What do you think about that, Bryce?
I guess it depends on the actual mid price we're talking about. If we're talking about Fantasia in particular, he could spike another game, but I think that what we intended Fantasia to be in the season is someone that's averaging higher than it is, and I'd be looking to turn him into a premium using any cash from another rookie. Even though, I guess, with the mid price, you probably have better job security than some of the rookies, so that's, I guess, the other consideration as to who you're going to trade in or out. There was something that came through today on the 3 Sydney rookies about some kind of resting program for each of them. So we may expect some of those guys to get a rest over the next few weeks. So that's probably an opportune time when they are rested to actually get rid of them or try and use them as a loophole for that week and continue to hold them until the buys. I find it really hard to prioritise because it's very team dependent and it depends on the targets that you have that present value at the time. I generally try and target the guys that have reached their bottomed out price and have that kind of semi-dictate the value that I need to trade out in order to get those particular premiums. For this week, there's a few top-end premiums which have bottomed out in price, such as Oliver, Neil and Walsh are probably all at some of their lower price and do present value, as well as Brayshaw. So I'm looking at the kind of guys that I want to trade out and how I prioritise it is who are the guys that I actually want to get to and that it suits my structure. So for me, at the moment, I'm really tempted to get rid of Goulden. He's starting to plateau in price after his first 2 big scores. He's still scoring pretty well, so more than fine to hold him. But yeah, in order to get up to a premium, that's someone that I might need to sacrifice because otherwise I can't really get up to the targets that I really want to go after.
Yeah, I think it's a good call in relation to answering a question around order. I think the one bit I'd add to balance that out is getting rid of one rookie on field that's a good scorer is palatable because you're replacing them with a premium. But hopefully you don't have to get rid of 2. Like it's fine to upgrade one and for the other dud one, hopefully to just nick one off the bench. But if you're having to go one up, one down, both from the on-field position, that's when I guess you have to think a little bit more carefully about the on-field scoring. I guess in general, just looking at how to prioritize trade outs outside of the team-specific considerations, one of the things I'd recommend people look toward is the top end for that particular player. And the longer you play the game, I guess the more of a feel you get for those things. A little bit is luck dependent, right? Like you're trying to guess how scores play out, injuries and whatever can come into it, and how the team goes can come into it, whatever else. But, a player like Errol Goulden, who scored 130 twice, his lowest score is 66, which was this week. In general, if you maintain that type of scoring momentum, he's the sort of player who you think 400 is within sort of his realm of capability, potentially 450. If you're looking at a player like Braden Campbell, he has some good scores, but he also has some poor scores, which can deflate how much his price goes up, because unless he happens to have his good scores in one cluster, the good score paired with a bad score can tend to limit the top end that a player like that can get up to. He's at a 118, but then of his next four scores, the top is a 56. So you look at a player like Braden and you go, if you had another big score in the 120 now, probably just scrape to 350 unless you could string multiple good games together, but maybe low 300s is where you're looking at. So you go, all right, maybe this guy's got another 90k of value, whereas Errol, if you thought he could get to 450, then not only are you forfeiting points on field, but you're potentially forfeiting 130k versus a Braden Campbell. So obviously there's a bit of guesswork that goes into it, but that's the other thing to look out for. It's not just the points that you're trading out, but also the potential value gain that those players have on offer. And that's why I guess I also bring up some of these mid prices. Once your mid prices start costing a similar amount to your rookies, in a lot of instances, I think I'd rather just back the mid pricer. So Fantasia, yes, he's definitely not scored the way we've hoped him to. The 39 last week was especially disappointing, but he did get a knock to the ankle, which clearly affected him through the game. And he plays for a good team, and you hope he kicks some goals. Like, he was never going to be a consistent player, but Fantasia's the type, like Joe Danaher, can put out a 120. So at 280, I'd expect that Fantasia can get to, again, a minimum of 350, probably hoping closer to 400. So I take that and I go, how does that stack up versus where I can see Braden Campbell? So it's a balance of a whole bunch of different things, but I definitely look toward estimating what you think a reasonable top end is. In general, your average rookies, 300 is something that they should just touch at some stage in the season. 350 is generally your better rookies, and then 400 are your really good rookies. So Chad Warner and Errol Goulden and their scoring history suggests that they should get to about 400. So if you look at Chad Warner, you go, you potentially only have another 70k within you. So maybe of all the guys, potentially most tempted to trade him out because it's not a heap of value gain. And as long as I can upgrade him, maybe I'll upgrade Chad Warner. 330 is a good price. Like you mentioned, Bryce, you also need to look at your trade-in target. Then maybe I can ditch a Braden Campbell who's off-field, or you might even have to trade somebody out who's not fully matured, but you're insisting on an upgrade this week because overall it delivers points on field. So you might get rid of James Jordan or somebody else a bit more begrudgingly off the ground. But I think in general, you're probably right, Bryce. It's pretty hard to give a specific ranking.
And I think you've both covered that really well. I am somewhat tempted with Orazio as a trade out just because his scoring hasn't been what I was hoping for this year. But in saying that, there is some wisdom to what you're saying there. I think that Chad Warner might be a better candidate to be traded out. It's an extra 50k already just from their comparative prices right now. So that could be a difference maker in terms of what you can turn that money into. And to be 1 week ahead of the upgrade cadence, particularly if it gets you up to a bona fide premium, it's one of the three that Bryce mentioned before. I think that those, to me, are the clear standouts this week. If you could get a Clayton Oliver into your side now, a couple of weeks of having him can quickly make a big difference.
And I guess trying to squeeze the last little bit of value from rookies, you can sometimes miss the opportunity to get a premium at a lower price. And I guess if you have to pay for that premium at a higher price later, it's almost cancels it out. So yeah, I look for in the scoring, if there's a kind of low score, I think that Warner got a 50. So that'll stall his price movements for a little bit until that 50 cycles out. So his break-even's up around 50. He's been scoring really well. He's attending around 50% centre bounce attendances. So he's not one that I want to move. But I guess in general, that's one thing I look for is when a rookie has a poor score, that can stall his price increases for 3 weeks. And you need to wait until you get to the other side till that low score cycles out before the price can increase again. So sometimes you need to cut it away because it's going to be another 3 weeks before you might make another 20k, and that might not be worth it. Fast cash is as good as more cash slowly, if that makes any sense. So I do look for the opportunities to, as people increase quickly, cut them out, get a new guy in, make some more fast cash. I think that's important in this game as well.
Yeah, especially in the early rounds. I think you probably get to the middle rounds where the fast cash is maybe less important and it's more about maximizing the value, because we get to a point where we're trying to finish our teams versus hit the upgrades really quickly, which we're generally a little bit more motivated for at the moment. But that's definitely the overriding theme at the moment, especially when you have some stalled cash like Highmore types and Brockman types and whatever else on your field. So that's a good point. I think if I was forced to choose a rookie from my team this week, it'd probably be Chad Warner. I think Errol Golden, I'm actually pretty happy to keep. Braden Campbell's another guy whose name I've seen thrown out a little bit. I think he's fine to trade out just because of his low scores, but I have a feeling that he's a bit of a slow burn rookie that if you gave a bit more time to, he should eventually get to 350. So you're probably passing up 100k of value there. But again, you're prioritizing all these things in terms of who you trade out so that you can upgrade early, etc. There's no clean answer. You're just taking different risks, combined risks really, in the players you trade out and trade in, who you're leaving on field and off field, and very much team dependent. But hopefully we've explained enough to give you a structure to make that decision. Let's just talk about rookies quickly. So Trindercuts asked, is Campbell to McCreary a must? I know we've talked about Lockie Jones a lot. If you have a downgrade this week and you can do in your back line, he's probably easily the standout as long as he continues to get named. I think that's probably not in doubt at this stage. But just in case you already brought Jones in or you're looking at a double down this week for whatever reason, McCreary is one that's been brought up. He's obviously on the bubble. Him or any of the other rookies take your fancy, Faz?
To be honest, none of them really stand out all that much to me. McCreary scored okay. He's gone 56, 58 in his first 2 games, but I do note that he's kicked at least 1 goal in both of those games and had a pretty high tackle count in his first game, so he doesn't get a lot of the pill. And I think it was 2 goals in the second game and then a bunch of tackles in the first game that's had his score look reasonable. In saying that, his job security should be okay with the run of injuries that they're having at Collingwood, so they might be in a spot where they just have to keep giving games to the kids now, because there's been another couple. I don't think De Goey's injury is all that bad. I think he'll be back after a week's concussion protocol, but with Taylor Adams out for extended period, Jeremy Howard's different part of the ground, but the injuries are starting to rack up at Collingwood. You're seeing them having to play Darcy Moore up forward. I think that McCreary could keep getting games. I wouldn't be moving heaven and earth to bring him into my side, but McCreary probably not a bad second option.
With some forward lines out there, F7 and F8 aren't looking too good at the moment, with Fullerton and Rose and Jones and Waterman. A few of those guys that you don't really want on your field. If you add a McCleary into that mix, you could end up with quite a few guys down there that you don't really want to be starting on your field. And I guess McCreary could be one of those guys that pump out a low score on your field if you are forced to put them on. So that, I guess, is something to keep in mind. I think that I like the idea more of going early on someone like Finlay Macrae, who's only played 1 game. If you're really looking for that downgrade option, although we don't like to encourage going early on the bubble, I think that he's probably one with some scoring potential and reasonable job security, because he also plays for Collingwood. He's probably one that I'd be happy to go early on rather than a McCreary.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bryce.
So on to just trade-ins to wrap up the upgrade talk. So Scott Warwick's asked, who should we be looking for in the sub 600k range? And I think that generally is where you want to be looking at for your first upgrade. Ideally, even less. 500k tends to be, one of those good value upgrades. So I know we talked about Oliver, Neil, Brayshaw. They're probably stand out in terms of value versus potential. But Neil's still 580-ish. Oliver's about the same. And so even though they present value, because they started high, Neil and Oliver are still a little bit more beyond reach than a lot of people would hope. So I think those two seem pretty obvious if you have that amount of cash. But talking a little bit cheaper, is there anybody else that takes your gents' fancy? Tom Stewart comes to mind after a 150 on the weekend. Probably hasn't had the hottest start, but looks reasonably reliable for top 6 and has started to show his top end a little bit.
The only other one that I've got on my list as a value option is Brayshaw. Has come down to 483. So he has had a few good games, but he's had a couple where he's been tagged and he hasn't handled it too well. I understand he's got the next 3 Optus Stadium, so he could return to some form. He actually scored well against Adelaide on the weekend with a 117. His opening games were 125 and 132, but that 66 and 48 doesn't look great on his CV. You're buying into a little bit of a risk there, but he's priced under 100 points a game at 483. Okay, so if you want to take some value, I think that he could be a pretty good one, and he could turn out to be a top midfielder.
He's got North as well this week, so could be in for a big score.
The other one I've got is in the forward line. So Dusty started high 500s or something like that. He's down to 522, so didn't start him. A lot of people did, but if you don't have him yet, and if you've got space in the forward line or midfield, I think that he's a pretty good valued option this week.
Yeah. A few other guys that I think people have been pretty keen on through the season, but surprisingly still cheap. Jayden Short, 522k. He's basically at a starting price tag. 74 on the weekend wasn't great, but he's still averaging 101, and most people see him as a top 6 candidate.
And the other one that did pop out at me when I was looking through the numbers, Braden Maynard. So Howe went down with an injury, and Maynard took up most of the kick-ins there, generally been around 1/3 of the kick-ins for Collingwood, jumped up to 86% with Howe dropping out of the game injured, and scored a 125. He's had a bit of a mixed season with scores of 106, 45, 81 and 49, but that 125 might be a bit of an indicator of things to come. And he's priced at 450. So if you're really struggling for an upgrade, he was pretty good as a premium last year. Hasn't really been talked about too much, but yeah, he could be one that you consider.
I'm going to throw Zorko in there as an owner. He's averaging 93 for the season, but I think he's averaged 4 free kicks against in the first 4 games. And so ill discipline has cost him a fair bit. But when you re-add those scores, in terms of his actual output on field, he's pretty close to premium numbers, and he's under 500k. And we talk about struggling to look for top 6 forwards in the forward line. He seems like a decent bet under 500k as a potential top 6 player. So he's another one that I would throw in there. With that, I think we will call the show. Probably maybe just get a quick call on Jordan De Goey. More for Mark than anything else. Concussion, not ideal. Mark was going to trade him out, but then ended up keeping him because of the ruck dilemma. For owners that have him, he's in, I think, 9% of teams. He's going to miss this week, I guess, with the concussion protocol. I think you're forced to miss one game. But you assume he should be back after that. Keep or trade, Bryce?
Tough one, priced at 340, which is an average of 66. If you're a person targeting someone, he might be someone that you look for a cheap premium upgrade. Missing for a week, borderline call. You're probably a little bit frustrated with his output. It's a chance to upgrade him to a proper premium or downgrade to a rookie. He hasn't been scoring that, so I'd probably trade.
Probably be inclined to keep him. Similar line of thinking to the Caleb Daniel decision last week. If others are looking at him as a potential trade-in option, it hurts that everybody else will get the player a lot cheaper than what you paid for them, but there's certainly no value to be had by trading out De Goey now. So long as you've got the cover, that would be the selling point for me. But otherwise, I think there's scope for De Goey to turn it around from here, so I'd just be holding.
I think that I've been on the whole train for De Goey, but I think I'm almost tempted to just cut him at this stage with missing around. I can see holding definitely working out, but if you're looking for your first upgrade, he seems like a decent candidate to turn into a true premium. I guess it just depends on how confident you are the top 6 forwards and whether or not De Goey could sneak there as an F6. Probably lost enough confidence that with an extra round out, he seems like a potential target to trade out. All right, and with that, we'll wrap up and head off to record the bonus Patreon episode. So jump on board, patreon.com/supercoachcoach if you are looking to support the show to get some bonus content. We're going to talk about Tom Hickey. We're going to talk about the rookie Ruck R2 for those that are still left with him. Don't forget you can follow Bryce on Twitter for all his great stuff. Faz and I are also on Twitter, but probably less to follow there. And with that, we'll thank you both, you gents, for coming on for the main show, and good luck on your charge upwards.
Plenty of room for improvement.
All right, and with that, we'll sign off for the week. See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.